stupid. There's one in here, I know that I could understand how these people, no, here it is. How these people did not, why would they actually even type up the label? I'm sitting here, and if I was that person sitting and typing up this label, I wouldn't be able to finish because I'd be laughing too hard. Now, the company is Amico Time Management, like cash registers. The name of the place is the Bleeding Weenie. It's the Bleeding Weenie. It's the Bleeding Weenie. It's the Bleeding Weenie. It's the Bleeding Weenie. To the Bleeding Weenie. Now, when I saw this, I lost control. Okay, I don't understand why, and it says, attention Thomas Dobbs. Now that's okay. We know it's Thomas Dobbs, but no one else is. The Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie. Come on. How could you actually type something up to the Bleeding Weenie? The Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie. The Bleeding Weenie, 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 the Bleeding Weenie. The Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, the Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie, Bleeding Weenie.